the board of St Paul's Cathedral, which, if you want a soft target in the middle of London, is pretty much it. And from a board trustee perspective, we put a lot of time and effort into looking at what soft target means in terms of iconic building. I'm chairman of Visit Manchester, the Manchester Tourist Board, where again we've had our own relatively recent experience of the IRA bomb right in the middle of Manchester, and also hosting the Commonwealth Games, and therefore understanding what that means in terms of protection, prevention, intelligence gathering, promotion and marketing, being essentially a propaganda unit when we know that there are bad stories out there, and ensuring that we have a vocabulary which is about imagination, attraction and motivation to visit, whilst at the same time also ensuring that we have a safe, welcoming destination is a bit of a challenge. I'm just going to take you through what VisitBritain as the National Tourist Board has learned in terms of crisis vocabulary and evolution. For us, within tourism, and we take a particularly sort of raw view of this, an extraordinary event which has immediately and potentially sustained impact on the tourism industry. For example, the July the 7th bombings, extreme weather, the potential of flu pandemic, avian flu, etc., etc. Or it is an extraordinary response from the media or the industry to an event that is non-critical to the tourism industry, for example, foot and mouth disease back in 2001. So from our perspective, it's both of those things, an actual crisis or an actual response to a perceived crisis. And both of those can have similar weight. In 2001 was probably the nadir of crisis management for Britain. We had the double whammy of foot and mouth disease, which started in about February, March of that year, and then went on to be exacerbated by the consequences of international travel because of September the 11th. Our own understanding that foot and mouth disease and September the 11th cost the UK tourism industry in excess of £3 billion that year. And that's due to things like cancellations, economic impact, people not travelling. But what agriculture was able to do, because of the way that it's constructed, largely through the National Farmers Union, was to respond very quickly to things like foot and mouth disease, to evaluate impact and cost, and to access ministers very directly, talking about what the economic impact was and therefore what ministerial responses should be. Tourism, being the fragmented industry that we are, was never in a position to do that, though this prompted some pretty swift responses to get, frankly, our act together, to ensure that we collated as much evidence as possible about economic impact, real, perceived or actual, that we were able to communicate back to government, and therefore seek the kind of economic or policy responses from government that we would need to support and sustain industry at moments of vulnerability. And the moments of vulnerability were quite protracted. It took 4 years to recover to pre-2001 levels. The London bombings in July 2005 we think depressed spending by visitors by £750 million. So the direct economic impact was pretty profound. Interestingly, we saw no tail off of bookings in the 24 hours, the 48 hours immediately after the bombings in central London. What did for us was the scares 2 weeks later. People got over the fact pretty quickly, because not that their overseas travellers are inured to tourism potential threats, but they kind of take it in their stride now in a way that perhaps they didn't back in 2001 or in the last decade. But they certainly do now. But the real impact was being reminded 2 weeks later after the July bombings that this could happen again. And that was the point where we saw mass cancellations, particularly from overseas visitors. We can't control the country's health or environment, even when they may have an impact on our performance. But we can lessen the impact, largely due to advanced planning, influencing, communicating consistently, and providing information and reassurance to stakeholders, and particularly visitors. And this is what we see as the core competence going to explain that, what it is in a second. This is our crisis assessment for Visit Britain as an organisation, and I'll just briefly take you through it. It gives an example of where we know that there are crises within our own grasp and control, and those which we have no control over, but we need to make a sufficient response. So, for example, visitor behaviour outside of Britain will be affected by things like September the 11th and SARS and avian flu, about which we have no control, and to which we can have some response, but it's largely going to be meaningless given the mass area that it covers. Visitor behaviour inside things like airport security, July the 7th, foot and mouth disease, those are within Britain, but again, they're without Visit Britain's control. We can have some response in terms of liaising with government to ensure that there's a much more coherent response by government. But we also created back in 2001 an external structure called TIA, which I'm Deputy Chair. TIA is the Tourism Industry Emergency Response Group. It mirrors COBRA. So when COBRA is called by the Prime Minister or the Deputy Prime Minister or the Home Secretary, at very short notice, the most relevant members are gathered together at very short notice in order to do three things, and these are mirrored by TIA as well. The first is to collate information and intelligence so that we can make appropriate responses and decisions. The second is to ensure that we have a common narrative and that all of our media appearances are based on the common story. And one of the things that we found in 2001 is that the National Farmers Union were coming up with a really strong, very coherent story about what the economic impact of foot and mouth disease was on the farming and agricultural community. The tourism industry was all over the place. The Hospitality Association, the British Hospitality Association was saying, speculating actually, that this will be the figure of economic impact. British Airways was saying something else. Visit London, the London Tourist Board was saying something else. The Society of London Theatres was saying something else, talking about the economic impact on the Society of London Theatres for foot and mouth disease, for goodness sake. And what we decided is that we needed to have a coherent structure which brought all of those relevant players together to come out with a common narrative and clear expression of views. And the third was to provide advice to ministers about what the necessary economic investments or policy responses needed to be from central government. And for central government, also read London government or local government or regional government, whatever the most appropriate scenario is. All of the national tourist boards of the United Kingdom and England's regional tourism delivery partners are part of that. And those are the government departments that either sit on TIA or we sit on their equivalent structures. So we monitor and gather that information and intelligence from our overseas markets and here in the UK. So if, for example, a bomb were to go off in Manchester, we would do a number of things. Firstly, we get a very good sense from Manchester Chamber of Commerce, Visit Manchester, the North West Regional Development Agency, Manchester City Council, on the local economic impact of that. And then our press officers from around the world in our 36 offices would also monitor the coverage of Britain and of that act in local markets on territory media, and provide that back on a daily basis at the end of play, and then we will send that through to DCMS, the Foreign Office, Undertaker, COBRA, etc. So the TIA group gathers all of that intelligence, and it will typically comprise ALVA, the Association of Leading Visitor Attractions, the British Hospitality Association on behalf of hotels and the accommodation sector, UK Inbound, which is the trade association for those inbound tour operators, PSA, I've just completely forgotten, I don't know what that is, Passengers Shipping Association here, Department of Culture, Media and Sport, which currently has the tourism responsibility, the ministerial tourism responsibility at the minute, Visit Britain, Visit London, Visit England, Visit Wales, Visit Scotland, regional bodies, plus those private sector companies who are most closely linked to what has happened. So if, for example, it's largely an airline issue, then British Airways, BAA, Virgin, etc., will also be on that. If it's something which is about food or avian flu, then we'll have a slightly changed composition. But it's relatively standing committee, and then people join it. And then we're also gathering in from UK tourism businesses their own experience, their own assessment of what the economic impact has been. We bring all of that together, understand it, interpret it, and translate it, both for government and then also for the media as well. The accurate and consistent information is self-evident. The business as usual message to international media would be our default setting that has to be interpreted in the light of whatever the crisis is. In July 2005, when the London bombings took place, it would have been rude, inappropriate, and disrespectful to say that we have business as usual. Business as usual cannot take place when you have the extent of death and casualties that we did on that particular day. And therefore, as you will know, as you can guess, vocabulary, timing, and appropriateness of marketing messages is absolutely key, even when you must probably have a fantastic marketing idea. Step back, put yourself in other people's shoes, and think what is the most appropriate message to give out at this time. We are the fifth biggest industry in the United Kingdom, and we're incredibly resilient as a tourism industry because look what we have to deal with, and we keep on bouncing back. Avian influenza, human swine flu, extreme weather events, terrorism, and things like the Olympics are now bread and butter crisis management scenarios for us in a way that I don't think they were sort of 10, 15 years ago. This is now normal DNA of the tourism industry. And therefore, in all parts of the tourism industry, this is something that is a core part, a key piece of the jigsaw for anyone coming up with both business plans, marketing opportunities, and crisis management and business continuity models. One of the things that we particularly learned is that at moments of crisis, almost everybody would like to be a media spokesman, whereas in the normal run of events, actually they would run from a camera or a microphone. Ensuring that we have clarity of message, both as an industry and also as an organisation, is something that's absolutely critical to the way that the industry and the organisation is perceived. And therefore being quite strict about who is the media spokesman, what they're saying and on behalf of whom, and clarifying what their role and job title is absolutely core. I'm sure that you'll be hearing that from colleagues later on. But now we have Twitter and Facebook and Bebo and social media. And now, and I'm sure colleagues will be talking about this later because we touched on it last night, it is now even more important that you, wherever you are, get your response out, a considered, thoughtful, appropriate response, as soon as possible, because God, nature, and the media abhor a vacuum. And if you don't fill up that media vacuum, that silence yourself, there are plenty of other people with iPhones who will do it at the drop of a hat. And therefore, the necessity to think about quick, though appropriate, and considered responses is more acute now than I think it was about 3 to 4 years ago before the advent of social media. And therefore the pressures that places on crisis management and communications team has doubled, I think, in recent years. It is likely in one of those markets that there is a promotional activity being undertaken by a VisitBritain office in Singapore which is inappropriate to the crisis at the time. And therefore having a structure in place where essentially you've got a very good sense of how Britain's being portrayed by us in this instance is absolutely critical in ensuring that no offensive, inappropriate or ill-considered messages are putting out. And therefore stopping that veto button is something that you can do centrally, and that's absolutely key. The do not be drawn into speculation or comparison is particularly important because the media will invite you to compare this particular crisis to another one. Compare and contrast is a default journalistic position. That doesn't mean it's a bad one, it's a commonsensical one, it's a personal one, it's one that we all do. But you should be very, very wary of doing that. For example, during the July bombings of 2005, the immediate question that I and colleagues were asked was, how does this compare to the Madrid bombings? You recall the train that was blown up by terrorists in Madrid. And we were absolutely clear that we would not make any comparisons at all to the Madrid bombings for two reasons. One, there were far more people killed in the Madrid bombings, and therefore we didn't want an equivalency of number or impact. And two, to try and say that something is equivalent to another piece of carnage is distasteful too. So it's not just being pragmatic and economically sensitive. There is a sense here that actually you just have to be professional and human in your response as well. One of the things that we have found is that in the recovery, the economic recovery period after a crisis, marketing can get you some way, PR can get you further. And particularly third-party endorsement PR is something that we highly prize. So both after foot-and-mouth disease, actually I'll give you an example. During the foot-and-mouth disease outbreak in 2001, it started in February, we decided at VisitBritain that we would organise, there's nothing like the Damascene conversion of people going, experiencing, understanding, seeing, and then reporting that back in order to have clear information transmitted around the world in a way that a tourist board can't do. Tourist boards are paid to be propagandists for the country. Journalists are paid to be independent free thinkers. We invited at 4 weeks' notice, now given the kind of people we're talking about, this was extraordinary. We invited at 4 weeks' notice 60 of the world's leading travel writers and tour operators. So these were the chief execs, the chairman, whoever. This was the editor of Travel Magazine and Good Living in the US. So these were serious journalists, and we invited them over on a red carpet tour of Britain. It was the kind of money can't buy red carpet tour of Britain, but absolutely going to places like the Lake District in Cumbria, where the outbreak was perceived to be greatest, and showing these people Britain is literally still open for business. You can visit these places. The castles are open. You know, there may be fields or farms or isolated communities, villages that you can't enter, but Britain is still open for business. Absolutely fantastic. And what the PRs went away from that was thinking two things. Two good, one not so good, but you can get over that. Two good things were, my God, Britain is still open for business. We've seen it, and we've seen it from the top to the bottom. Secondly, this is an organisation who can open doors like you wouldn't dream of. They must know what they're doing. They must be well connected. I trust these people. And three, the less good bit, if they've done all of this at short notice, they must be desperate. And they were right, of course. We were desperate because we're a £140 billion industry, and that kind of means a lot. That was to illustrate the point that PR, well crafted, well thought through, imaginative, creative, brave sometimes, I think will get you further than even the most creative, inspirational marketing activity. We place a lot of emphasis on it. But what I do know is that the theories, the evidence base, the thoughtfulness, the consideration about what complexity theory, particularly with soft targets like tourism, the evolution of thinking is to be absolutely welcomed, because not getting it right, particularly for the tourism industry, which is enormous yet fragmented, is very important. We as the tourism industry, both in the United Kingdom and around the world, need all of the help that we can get from clear thinking, clever thinking, good modelling, because it's the largest industry in the world. And if we are not embracing new thinking, new modelling, new preparedness about the ways in which we handle crisis, partly exploit crises actually, and certainly recover from them, if we're not doing that as the largest industry in the world, it's not very clear who else should be. And therefore, I think this is particularly important. And the seminar program that Eve outlined at the beginning is really positive and to be entirely welcomed, because we have so much to learn from it, an incredible amount to share. This is just a small illustration of that, but equally a huge amount to learn. Our learning over the course of the last couple of years has come from three particular areas. Our own raw experiences. And raw experience is not to be dismissed lightly. It shapes and defines and fosters partnerships and bonding, actually, within organisations and between people that is of profound help and use. UK resilience. The UK, I think, is regarded around the world as being one of the most thoughtful, most prepared, most savvy, most intelligent governments when it comes to security, preparedness, intelligence gathering, and protecting our own citizens. And one, you can never completely, entirely predict the crisis that you will face. It is one of those unforeseeables, which sounds like an oxymoron. You can predict it, but you can't precisely define it. But traits, characteristics, elements of that crisis can be foreseen, can be predicted, can be anticipated, and can be managed for. Has to bounce back. Tourism has to bounce back because it's the largest job creator in the world. In the United Kingdom, it creates 3 in 5 jobs, even in the teeth of a recession. And tourism creates jobs at all skill levels in all parts of the United Kingdom more quickly than any other part of the economy. If we want to really propel ourselves out of recession here in the UK, my plea would be to put more money into marketing Britain to generate consumer demand, which in turn creates jobs, regenerates communities, and sustains economies. But in order to do that properly, we need to think about the black side as we need to think about the opportunistic side. We campaign, we motivate, we emote, we place desire, we really get people excited about coming to our destination. That's the poetry. We excite and we inspire and we encourage passion. But the delivery of that, the fulfillment of that promise, is pretty prosaic. It's getting it right for food and drink. It's making sure the beds are turned down. It's making sure that everything is clean. It's making sure that you're not exploited. It's making sure the transport runs on times. And it's making sure that you feel safe and protected in your destination.
Thank you for this excellent survey. I have a question regarding to the second of these categories, UK resilience information. You basically put this information at the disposal of the public, but the potential enemy can also use that information, and it might boomerang. Have you ever seen effects that such information has actually been helpful to the other terrorist or other side?
Some of the least helpful contributions about targets actually come from British media themselves.
You certainly put on the map the importance of the tourism industry for UK economy and the fact that there's no government department to support it. Are you aware of how close we are to achieving that, or is it something that's spoken at length in government?
It is. It's a very good point. Tourism in the UK survives and thrives because of transport, which is another government department, visa pricing, another government department, planning, another government department.
From ESRC, you were talking a lot about tourism industry being quite fragmented, and I was thinking about current discussions about the threats of terrorism and disruption, and what comes up a lot is that vulnerabilities and interdependencies between different sectors, different businesses, different infrastructures. Surely tourism industry depends on various different infrastructures and other fabrics of businesses. You seem to talk a lot about the sort of coming together and working with government. Do you envisage any benefit in trying to work with the businesses directly, or do you think this would always have to go through government and then to other businesses?
We commissioned a piece of research last year, which I wrote up, called the British Tourism Framework Review, which was the first time that the depth and breadth and extent and value of the tourism industry had been closely identified. And what we found was the UK tourism industry direct value is £86 billion a year. Its indirect value is £114 billion, £115 billion from next Monday. And that includes things like, a very good example was during the foot and mouth crisis in 2001, a number of bed and breakfasts within part of the Lake District closed down because they weren't getting bookings, their cash flow stopped, they weren't getting any support from the local banks. So within a particular locality, about 5 bed and breakfasts closed, and so did the local laundry, because it got its income from washing the sheets of the bed and breakfast. And it's a good example of where indirect alliances are between different parts of the economy, but you can still link them together because they have the same profound economic benefit. So we're very clear that tourism survives and thrives because of our alliances and our dependence on other parts of the economy. And I suppose the continual struggle is to ensure that they are as appreciative of their role to tourism as we are appreciative of. But we're locked in very closely to the Metropolitan Police, but also things like the British Hospitality Association and the retail sector, the British Retail Consortium, in order that we ape, or at least are aware of, similar crisis management structures so that we can feed in and have a complementary role as opposed to a duplicate role. What I think we need to do as a matter of urgency is to replicate some of those structures out with London, because I would not be confident that those crisis management structures exist particularly in the regions of England or in Scotland and Wales to the same extent as they do in London. And that's probably unsurprising given most crisis or terrorist activity has largely been in London, but not exclusively. And I would like to see greater investment and greater support and greater work in making those structures as ready to handle a crisis as the ones in London.